This article unveils one of the most devastating moments imaginable, where every boundary of trust, morality, and family is violently torn apart. When Donnell accidentally witnesses a brutal truth unfolding inside his own home, his entire world collapses in an instant, in ways no one could ever foresee. This is not just an ordinary shock. It is the beginning of a dark spiral, where long-buried secrets claw their way to the surface, dragging with them anger, betrayal, and the most dangerous corners of human emotion. What you are about to read opens the door to a story where every step brims with tension, where every character is pushed against the wall and forced to confront the most ruthless version of themselves. Donnell froze in the center of the living room, a sudden chill gripping his spine, a visceral, unrelenting sense of betrayal coiling through his chest. The faint glow of the overhead light did nothing to soften the scene before him. Instead, it illuminated every detail in cruel precision. Vanessa, his mother, poised and elegant even in moments of vulnerability, was entwined with Joey, a man Donnell had once regarded as a friend, a confidant, someone tethered to the fragile trust of his family. They moved together in a private intimacy, utterly unaware, or perhaps deliberately indifferent, to the destruction their actions would leave behind. Every brush of skin, every lingering touch, reverberated through Donnell's consciousness like a hammer against glass. Shock surged first, numbing him to the point where he could barely comprehend the sight. It was not only the betrayal of familial boundaries that struck him but the depth of the personal violation, the invasion of a space he had always considered sacred. The living room, once a haven of laughter, warmth, and security, now felt alien, oppressive, and suffocating. Donnell's mind raced, replaying memories of his mother, her smiles, her reassurances, the way she had always anchored him in a world that often seemed chaotic. And now, that anchor was gone, replaced by a harsh, unbearable reality. Joey, whom he had admired and trusted, now seemed to embody treachery itself, a symbol of deceit and moral corruption. Anger, raw and incandescent, rose quickly from beneath the shock. It burned through Donnell's veins like molten lead, threatening to consume him entirely. How could Vanessa, who had preached love, loyalty, and protection, abandon all decency so recklessly? How could Joey, who had once shared in confidences and family bonds, surrender so completely to desire without a hint of conscience? The question gnawed at Donnell with a ferocity that made it impossible to think clearly. He felt simultaneously powerless and enraged, trapped in a moment where the only option seemed devastating. Each heartbeat amplified the injustice, each breath drew in the acrid sting of betrayal. As the initial shock ebbed, a wave of internal conflict took hold. Donnell wrestled with the complexity of human imperfection, the murky line between personal desire and moral obligation. Vanessa was not merely a mother, she was a woman with her own needs, emotions, and flaws. Could he condemn her entirely, or was this a reflection of choices long suppressed, impulses long ignored, manifesting in a moment of reckless abandon? And Joey, too, could not simply be reduced to villainy. Perhaps he, like everyone else, was driven by impulses he could not control, trapped by circumstances and desire. Yet rationalization offered little solace against the visceral impact of the betrayal. Every instinct screamed that he must respond, confront, act, but the method and consequences remained entirely uncertain. Time seemed to stretch endlessly as Donnell surveyed the scene, each second magnifying the weight of realization. The familiar walls of his home, once reassuring, now pressed in, a claustrophobic reminder of the impossibility of escaping the truth. He could feel the legacy of his family's history pressing upon him, the fragile bonds of trust, loyalty, and honor that had been nurtured over years now teetering precariously on the edge of ruin. There was no one to intervene, no safeguard to protect him from the emotional tempest unleashed. The quiet, insidious nature of betrayal was laid bare. It was not a single act, but a cascade of choices, each compounding the last, until the entire foundation of his existence seemed unstable, ready to crumble at any moment. Fear emerged alongside anger, a creeping, gnawing dread of what would happen if the situation continued unchecked. The potential fallout was staggering. Exposure of the liaison would shatter reputations, sever relationships, and invite scrutiny that could change the lives of everyone involved irrevocably. But silence was equally dangerous, a compromise that would haunt Donnell with complicity. The knowledge he now possessed carried with it a weight of responsibility he was unprepared to shoulder. Each path forward seemed perilous, fraught with moral and emotional landmines that could detonate without warning. The consequences of action and inaction alike loomed, each threatening to inflict wounds both immediate and enduring. Within this storm of emotion, a fierce resolve began to crystallize. Donnell recognized that the only way to reclaim agency in his life was to confront the situation, to navigate the tangled web of desire, betrayal, and secrecy with deliberate purpose. He would need clarity, strategy, and endurance, not just emotional impulse. Every choice, every decision carried the potential to redefine the dynamics of trust, power, and consequence within his family. Yet he understood that hesitancy or passivity would be a form of surrender, allowing betrayal to dictate the terms of engagement. To act, even in uncertainty, was to reclaim some measure of control over the chaos that threatened to engulf him. In the end, when the dust settled and the silence inside the house grew heavier than any scream Donnell could have unleashed, the full weight of what he had witnessed pressed down on him like a vice. The image of Vanessa and Joey locked in that forbidden moment refused to fade, replaying itself in sharp, merciless fragments. It wasn't just a betrayal of trust, it was the collapse of the one foundation he believed would never fail him. And as he stepped back from the doorway, each movement felt like an exile from the world he once knew. Vanessa, consumed by her own tangled desires and the fear of her secret being exposed, found herself spiraling into a state of internal conflict that she could no longer ignore. She had crossed a line she could never uncross, and the guilt that once whispered faintly now roared like a storm inside her chest. Joey, equally guilty and terrified of the consequences, began to withdraw into a defensive shell, making decisions driven more by fear than responsibility. Both were trapped in a web they wove together, and every attempt to escape only tightened the threads pulling them toward ruin. Donnell could feel the fractures spreading through the family, not like cracks on a surface but like something breaking deep inside the structure, quiet, slow, irreversible. The air in the house shifted, carrying with it a tension that infected every corner, every unspoken interaction. He no longer looked at his mother the same way, no longer trusted Joey's presence, no longer believed in the innocence of the world he had grown up believing was stable. The betrayal had carved a void inside him, one that swallowed everything familiar and replaced it with a simmering mix of rage, confusion, and a cold determination to distance himself from the people who had hurt him. Yet the cruelest part of the aftermath was the silence. No confrontations, no confessions. Only an unbearable quiet, where every gesture felt loaded with hidden meaning, and every moment seemed to be building toward an inevitable breaking point. Vanessa tried to carry on as if nothing had happened, but the fear in her eyes betrayed her. Joey shifted between guilt and self-preservation, knowing that any wrong move could expose everything. And Donnell, carrying the heaviest burden of all, battled the destructive impulses rising inside him as he tried to understand how something so devastating could happen within the walls meant to protect him. As days passed, the unspoken war between them deepened. Lines were drawn, even if none of them dared admit it. Donnell began to see how this single moment could unravel everything: trust, stability, family identity, and he understood that nothing would ever return to the way it used to be. Each of them was forced to confront their own darkness, and in that confrontation, the fragile bonds holding them together continued to erode. When everything finally settled into a haunting stillness, Donnell realized the truth: this was not an ending, but the beginning of a fracture that would reshape all their lives. The betrayal would continue to echo through every decision, every memory, every attempt to rebuild. And no matter how desperately they tried to hide from it, the moment he witnessed would forever stand as the point where their family broke, and where a new, painful reality began.